Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mushtaq Al-Ashari. I am coordinator of All-Party Parliamentary Group on Third World Solidarity. Could you come from the back door, please?
Yeah.
There is, if you go to the next door. My name is Mushtaq Al-Ashari. Let me start again. I am the coordinator of Third World Solidarity. Can I welcome you all on behalf of APPG on Third World Solidarity, which is the host of this evening event. I'm terribly sorry and my apologies that Dave Anderson, who is our chairman, is flying to USA today and he couldn't be here. Other MPs will come and go, and that's why I would request if people can move further on their left. I know people don't like to be on the left nowadays, but I am on the left. I think this is your house. You should come and use it more often, because you and I pay the tax to put the MPs here. We pay for them. So they are tenants, our tenants. We are landlords. But don't go to that tenancy where some of you have gone, because that is a very wrong place to be tenant at. Colin is sitting at the end and many other friends. And I hope this evening is enjoyable, successful. I once again welcome Third World Solidarity, which I said is our slogan or our aim is peace, justice, tolerance and democracy. So we listen to it. I'm very, very pleased to it, because usually in this parliament, in the bigger house and everywhere, and in the other side, today we are discussing news of the world, or news corporation, which has been defeated. When people get together, they can defeat anybody. So I'm very pleased that today we men are in minority and you are in majority. And that's why I'm retiring to the back seat, that the ladies can take over it. Can I hand over to Leah Thorne, who is the host and organizer of this evening? Thank you very much.
I just want to start by saying thank you to Mushtaq. It's down to Mushtaq that we're here, and there's something very meaningful for me about having this meeting here, honouring women in prison and hearing their stories. So my name is Leah Thorne. I have the great privilege to be the compiler and editor of Release, which is a book we're going to be looking at this evening. The main focus of this evening is women in prison, expressive writing and empowerment. So individual empowerment, but using expressive writing for social transformation. So it feels very fitting that we're here. Before I say much more, I'm going to welcome up Clive Hopwood, who is the director of Writers in Prison Network. And it was through Writers in Prison Network that I had wonderful 2 years of my life in Bronzefield, a women's prison. And so I'm going to welcome up Clive to say a few words.
It's a pleasure to see a fantastic audience tonight, and I can see all sorts of interesting people from just the right sort of organisations that will attend this event. Writers in Prison Network puts creative writers into prison to do residencies, and it is our great pleasure and privilege to be able to set up and support Leah's residency at Buxton and the fantastic work that she did there. Now, I think at the core of what we do, we feel it's absolutely essential that we make public, that publish the voices, the stories of everybody we work with in prison. That's men, women, juveniles, young offenders, all ages, everybody. Because it's important what prisoners have to say. People who spend time in prison have got vital, essential things to say, both to the public, to the government, to anybody who ought to be listening and understanding the nature of the criminal justice system and how people arrive there, and what kind of stories that have led them to that space of their life. I think this book, I find this book immensely moving. It's both a moving and an incredibly illuminating book, and everybody should read it. I think within women's prisons, it's going to prove to be a fantastic tool to be used with the women, because the stories that you read in this book and the background information is so honest and so deeply felt. I defy anybody not to come out of reading material from this book not to feel moved by it, and to be moved to support what the women in prison in particular are doing. So I think in terms of the issue of self-harm, well, it's prevalent across the entire prison system, but nowhere is it more important than in women's prisons. And I think this book goes a long way towards addressing what has been a sort of far too long it's been neglected. And this book hopefully will create a greater public awareness of it and be a fantastic tool for years, many years to come in the women's prison estate. So, thank you to Leah, but especially thank you to all the women who contributed to this book. And I have to say, I can't help but say, I was deeply moved by this book, and I recommend everybody should rush over there afterwards and put some money in those baskets and take away a copy and lend it to people. Encourage other people to buy it, because this is a very, very important publication. Thank you.
I just want to give you a bit of a format for the evening, just so that you know what we're going to be doing for the next couple of hours together. The book was never intended. Hi, there's some seats.
There are seats here or at the end.
The book was never intended to be given out cold, and I'm going to be talking more about that, about the context of the book. But I wanted to spend at least the first 45 minutes giving a backdrop to the book. So you're going to hear from some of us about what it means to be a woman in prison nowadays, what the intersection of sexism and racism is, so what specific issues there might be for black women in prison service. We're going to see a couple of clips from a film that was made at Bronzefield. But the most important bit, really, is hearing from women, hearing their stories and their poetry. Some of the women in this room are women that I worked with in Bronzefield, and it gives me such pleasure to welcome them here. And some of the women here have decided not to read their own poems, so it will be read by either a mate of mine or somebody who's connected in with the work. But that's one way of really giving women voice. And at the end, there'll be time for questions and agreements and disagreements, and hopefully we'll have a nice debate. We've got the room till 10 o'clock, but I don't intend that we'll stay here that long. Who knows? What I'd like to do, I'm going to sort of be holding this all together, so I'm just going to be saying a few things as we go. The first thing I'd like to say, getting into the kind of the meat of the subject, is I thought I'd like to give you a flavour of how I work with women in prison. So some of you will be relieved to know we're not going to write a poem at this point, but we are going to do something that I might do at the beginning of a workshop. We're going to have a very quick icebreaker, and this is just by way of you getting to see who's around you, and also to start to build the environment in which we can have conversations we need to have, and in which disclosure can happen. So I have 3 assistants over here, Arike and Lillian and Marina, who are going to give you a human bingo sheet that you've never had before, and a pen if you don't have one. And while they're giving them out, I'll just explain what will happen. On the human bingo sheet, there are 9 boxes, and each one of them has a little sentence in there. So some of it says, loves dancing, some of it says, knows how many women's prisons there are in England. What I'd like you to do is to talk to somebody near you who you don't know. So don't just talk to the person that you came with, but see if you can find out something on that sheet that is true for them, and then you just ask them their name and put their name in. And as soon as you've found something that's true for them, move to someone else. I know there's not lots of space here, but I'll just give you like 3 minutes. You should be able to talk to at least a couple of people and just see what you can find out and put their name on the sheet. We don't have a prize, sorry. The prize will be that you get to be here with all these gorgeous people. So, a bit of cooperation passing around. Anyone who knows the title of the final report of the Women's Justice Department? Oh, you do? Yes. Do you want to tell us what?
A lady called Jan. knows exactly the title.
There are some chairs over here.
Do you want to? No, it's not. Oh, it's not the costing report. No, the costing report is well worth reading.
Isn't it just what the response is?
No? Anyway, I'm not testing you. It's really worth looking at. It's called Reforming Women's Justice, and it's quite a new report, very interesting. So, worth looking at. I won't go through the rest of it, like who watches EastEnders and stuff like that. So thank you for going with that. And those of you who've just come in, you missed Human Bingo. So what I'd say about it is that that's the sort of thing that I might do to start a workshop. It's light, it's fun. But when I thought about this evening and I thought about what I want to communicate and what I hope that we all communicate, is the importance of connection, the importance of how we meet each other. Because if, as a society, we have to imprison people, and there's big question marks about that, particularly around women, but if women are to be imprisoned, I think it's crucial that there is connection and relationship, that this kind of way of being human, in an environment which by its very nature is not going to be human, is dehumanizing to some extent. So it's important that we have that connection. Expressive writing, and by that I particularly mean poetry and life story writing, is one way, only one way of making that connection. And I think often people think that I think that's all that's needed, that if everybody wrote their life story or poetry in prison, the world would be transformed. I don't believe that, but I think it's one way. So before I hand over to two women from Women in Prison organisation, I just want to read you a poem that was given to me last week. Some of you here are from Holloway Prison, and I've just finished an amazing 6 weeks working with older women in Holloway. And last week, this time last week, they did a performance. And at the end of it, one of the older women in the audience came up and gave me this poem. And it's so pertinent to this evening that I asked her if I could read it. So I'm not going to tell you her name because she didn't want you to know her name. But this was from a woman in Holloway. Know me. Tell me that you know me. As I look into your eyes and hope you realize that you know me. If I drift so far out and I don't wave or shout, will you drive in to save me? Or will you let me go because you didn't know? Just one look from you to show that I've got through would be enough to save me. So I thank that woman really for those words, very tightly put. Just know me. And if any of you are interested, some of the wonderful poetry that older women have written during the last few months in 3 different prisons is featured in the Women in Prison magazine over there, the latest copy, and it's a good read. So for the last 5 months I've been writer in residence at an amazing organisation called Women in Prison. It's an organisation that I've admired for a long time, and I'm really so pleased that the director, Rachel Halford, and Shana Campbell, who works with black and minority ethnic women, that they agreed to come and speak to us to give us a backdrop to the situation for women in prison. So please welcome Rachel first. Please welcome Rachel.
And thank you, Liv, for inviting me. It's a real privilege to be invited to come and just to provide the backdrop this evening. As Leah said, I'm just going to set the scene really briefly, 5 minutes, set the scene. And for some of you, probably you're very familiar with scenes, so look around and see familiar faces. I think this time last year, I was invited to attend a workshop, and this workshop, there was the core of it was to look at some kind of blue sky thinking around the criminal justice system, women in the criminal justice system, and what we would like to see. And sat at my table was this gentleman who worked in the prison service for 30 years. And he sat there quite indignantly, and he said, well, you know, the blue sky thinking really is, if we're really serious, you know, for women in the criminal justice system, what we have is we have between 40 and 60 women who are lifers or have indeterminate sentences, who will never be released from prison. So what we actually need is a small custodial unit that will house them. Aside from that, we have maybe just under 1,000 women who have, for reasons of public safety or need rehabilitation, they need to be in prison, so perhaps we could have 2 other units. And then to be quite frank, we don't need any other prisons. So putting that in context today, and breaking that down, today there are 13 prisons, 13 female prisons which were built by men, for men, not for women. And are, I have to say, at maximum capacity today, because one's actually just closed. They tend to re-roll them and close them. I've worked for women in prison for 6 years, and 3 have gone in my time. If we put it in the context, so today there are 4,193 women in prison. If we look at 64% of them, and I'm going to try and not give you loads of stats, and Leah did say don't give loads of stats, and I will try really hard, but it's not easy because you need the stats, because you need the basic information. But 64% of women who are in prison have committed non-violent offences and are serving short sentences. If we take 64% and then add on, or if I take 64% of 4,200, probably what it is, it leaves us with 1,512 women in prison, which is approximately what this gentleman who had worked for prisons over 30 years has said is all we need. Prison as it is today doesn't work, and that is the bottom line. What we need is, and what we campaign for, is an abolishment of the prison system that we know today. Just a small snapshot of the women that the women that are in prison, and I'm going to reference it. The most marginalised women, which I think most of you will know, with particular vulnerabilities, and I'm naming it like that, which is Jean Corstall's, whereas in Jean Corstall wrote a Corstall report, which I'm hoping a lot of people will know about. She categorised women's needs into 3 different groups: domestic, personal, and socio-economic. So in the domestic, you've got women who come from abusive relationships. 79% of the women that are in prison come from an abusive relationship. Single parents, 60% of women who go into prison are the main carers of children. When they go into prison, 17,700 children a year are left without parents. 5% of those don't even get to stay in their own home. Personal, we've got low self-esteem and depression. So within this category, you've got mental health issues. 74% of women who, when they enter prison, have 2 or more diagnosed mental health issues. Huge amount. 37 of them have committed or are trying to commit suicide life at some point in their life. And 54% of the incidents, and I think it's something that you said earlier, the incidents in prison of self-harm are committed by women who only make up 5% of the prison population. Does that actually make sense? That didn't make sense to me as I said it. I'm just going to say it again, because 54% of the total prison population are women who self-harm, but women only make up 5% of the prison population. So it's a huge amount. And then socio-economic, which is isolation, unemployment and poverty. So women are the most marginalised group. They are the most marginalised group. Essentially, they have issues which need to be and can be addressed outside of prisons. So just in my last 2 minutes, sorry, I'm speeding up because I can see the clock and my 5 minutes is gone. I was just about to go. So today, there's a great emphasis on alternative custody, and that's fantastic. We really welcome that. But what's happened during this focus on alternative custody is everybody's forgotten about the women that are still in prison. 1,900 and something, 1,200, it's a lot of women in prison. We need to ensure, and what we need to do and ensure through campaigning is that we campaign for change and abolishment of the system, is that whilst this is happening and whilst we are campaigning, that women still receive the appropriate support that they need. And this support would be provided in a holistic manner, with a primary focus on, as Leah has already said, relationships, to enable them to address and overcome their issues. Relationships. And at the core, women that come from abusive relationships, the majority of these women that we work with, they have never formed relationships. This is one of the reasons why prison doesn't work. And to be quite frank, community alternatives won't work if relationships aren't built. It is about building relationships. I'm going to hand it to, I'm umming now, this is what I do when I speak, I start umming. I'm actually going to hand over to Charlotte, my colleague Charlotte, who's going to talk to you specifically about the needs of BME women.
Good evening, everyone. Does anyone know how many black and Asian minority women there are in the UK? I'll let you know. Okay, there are 2.3 million black, Asian and minority women in the UK, making up just fewer than 4% of the total population of the UK. Black female prisoners make 26.4% of female prisoners. British Asian women prisoners make 4% of the female prison population. There are a high number of foreign national prisoners, and at present, 1 in 5 women in prison are foreign nationals. A quarter of Jamaicans make up the largest of that group. A survey showed that there were more than 1/3 of black women prisoners rated the diversity in prison in general as poor or extremely poor, and only 18% of them were satisfied with the advice given about money and benefits once they were released from prison, compared with 38% of the white women surveyed. Okay, that was referenced by Chigwada Bailey in 1997. Okay, now I'm going to tell you about somebody I'm currently working with that has had issues with the criminal justice system from the start and is still having issues right now. Gloria was referred to the BME project whilst in prison on remand for 9 months. Whilst in prison, she was not given the relevant antenatal care, although the prison records showed that she was pregnant. However, they thought she was suffering from mental health issues, so they chose to disbelieve her. Whilst in custody, Gloria contacted Children's Services to inform them that her 2 children were outside and they needed the care. It took 5 months for social services to intervene, decide to intervene. Whilst in care, her eldest son tried to commit suicide. He tried to hang himself. He was in a coma for 4 days, and they failed to inform my client until 3 weeks later. Gloria herself, whilst in prison, tried to self-harm. Contrary to popular belief, black women do not self-harm. Gloria was released on bail, and the CPS are at the moment trying to discuss compensation at the moment because they didn't bring the relevant information in order to charge her, so she has not been charged with any information at the moment. In concluding, I want to leave you with these thoughts. The failure to understand and develop fund services that address the holistic and specific needs of BME women will ensure that women like Gloria will continue to get a poor deal both before and after they have had contact with the criminal justice system. Gloria has not been convicted of any criminal offence, but following her contact with the criminal justice system, she lost her home, her job, and is still fighting now to see her children.
We then move into hearing some poetry, and one of the greatest things about being writer in residence for women in prison is I got to work with a feisty group of women who are out of prison and in that very vulnerable position of just making contact again, getting back into life outside of prison. And 3 of them have decided to read their poems for you. And I'm very excited to hear this. So I just want to check, do you want to stay where you are to read? Okay, so I'll introduce Celine and Melissa and Olga in that order. So Celine, I'll hand over to you because I know you're going to start by talking about what poetry means to you. Would you like to start so everyone can see this? No pressure on it. So big hand for Celine.
poetry. Writing is expressing true feelings. Most of my writing is based on what I know, mainly my experiences through life, people around me and nature. I am alive when I write because it flows in me without thinking. I write with my body, mind, and soul. It helps me in coping with different situations. My happiness and sadness are shared on a blank piece of paper. It is my passion, my drug, therapy, it is my life. I find it hard to talk to people most of the time because I don't think they would want to know about me or about my life. So by writing, I can pour my heart out on paper without being judged by others. Writing helps me express my sadness and happiness. It is my healing. Pen and paper is part of who I am. Writing helps me learn more about myself. Writing gives me hope, set me free, and make me believe. Writing is freedom. It is life, love. It is my passion. Sorry. I once had a cool friend with the smile of life. Sorry. Sorry.
While you get the poem, I'll just say that what Celine just read is in the Women in Prison magazine, so if you want to go over it again and again and again, it's there for you to take away. And do you want to introduce Ella?
Well, this poem, I'm going to read this poem in French, and Ella will be reading in English. La méchante petite fille. Elle était à la fois amère et acide. Elle est fâchée. Elle crie et tape les pieds contre la terre qui nous protège. Chaque fois que la colère empoisonne ses veines, elle part des yeux blancs aux méchants rouges comme le soleil sénégalais.
The angry girl. The girl was as bitter as a Scotch bonnet pepper. When she was angry, she screamed and stamped. Her eyes changed colour each time she felt the anger growing in her veins. They went from bright, clear eyes to angry red, like the Senegal sun.
Elle criait, s'écriait, luttait. Sa colère ressemblait à un géant vert déplaisant. Ses cris attiraient la forêt dans le Sahara profond et sécha la mer Rouge. Elle était en colère à tout moment, mais disait jamais pourquoi.
She would yell, shout, wrestle. Her anger was like a nasty green giant. Her screams attracted a forest in the deep Sahara and a dried up Red Sea. She was always angry, but wouldn't say why.
Sa mère ne comprenait pas sa colère si ennuyante, disait, ma précieuse petite princesse, tu es mon rayon de soleil. J'ai essayé de te caresser, mais ton corps m'a refusé. De te cajoler, mais tu es pleine d'amertume. Ta bouche est dure comme la terre. Ton cœur est rempli d'acide toxique. Tu as avalé la pluie en nous laissant dans la terre. Ton cœur est rempli... Oh, sorry. Tu as avalé la pluie en nous laissant dans la sécheresse. Ta fureur empêcha le soleil de briller. Nous n'avons plus de l'air frais. Ton amour si cruel, qui est impossible et furieuse contre le monde entier.
Her mother couldn't understand where her anger came from. So she said, my precious princess, I have tried to caress you, but your skin won't let me. I have tried to nurture you, but you are too bitter. Your mouth is tough like the earth. Your heart is filled with toxic acid. You have swallowed up the rain. Your anger has stopped the sun from shining. We no longer have fresh air. Your love is turning into cruelty. You are angry with the world.
La furieuse petite fille n'aimant pas les commentaires de sa mère, Elle souffla au 7e ciel avec des bulles. Elle découpa sa poupée, qui est le symbole de sa joie. Elle piétina son père et essaya de le détruire. Mais il était indétruisable. Elle avala ses voisins et se retrouva seule au monde.
The angry girl did not like her mother's comments, so she blew her sky high with bubbles. She tore her doll that linked her happiness to life. She stomped on her father and tried to break him, but he was unbreakable. She gulped her neighbours.
Son corps se transforma en robot. Elle resta isolée au monde si sombre et si froid. Plus personne pour crier dessus, plus personne à détruire et plus personne à engloutir. Elle réalisa que la vie ne peut pas être vécue seule, mais il est trop tard. Maintenant, elle essaie de traverser le monde, mais ses mains sont hésitantes et trop rugueuses.
Now she is left in the dark world by herself. No one to scream at, no one to blow up, and no one to swallow her. She realises that life cannot be lived without people, but it is too late. Her body has transformed into a robot. She tried to caress the world, but her hands were too tough, too rough.
La méchante petite fille n'arrive plus à ressentir le monde, ni voir la beauté magnificente de la nature, ou sentir l'air frais qui circule et nous donne la vie aussi précieuse. Le goût aussi succulent du monde restera pour elle un mystère pour toujours.
The angry girl cannot feel the world any longer, cannot see it nor smell it. The sweet taste of the world will remain a mystery to her.
Get autographs later. So now please welcome up Melissa. Yay.
Responsibility. One looking insight into one situation you feel like an awakening. Awakening is yes. I feel as though something inside me is shifted, activated. I have clarity, understanding, direction. However, when one looks at one through a window, one can scour just as easily as one scours when looking in from the mirror. However, when one looks out the window and no longer scours, but scours inside the mirror, inside the mirror, the spiritual journey begins. Generally, one would have scars inflicted by another, maybe many. However, when one looks into the mirror and acknowledges the scars one has inflicted on oneself and shadows, the journey continues. One may have justified self-destruction by another's action, perhaps even repeated this pattern. The word missing in one's life, responsibility. There are many anagrams one can find in this 14-letter word. Responsibility is what catches my eye. Response being the individual's ability to conduct oneself to life and life's terms, ability being the individual's response to life and life's terms. Responsibility. One has now reached the junction. 3 roads lie ahead. One looking through a window and scouring at one looking through a mirror and scouring at himself. Responsibility.
Thank you. And now, Olga.
I can't name this feeling, so slippery, but always inside me. Hard to grasp, like a play written in old English. Hard to get rid of, like a heavy ankle bracelet that I drag everywhere with me, even if it doesn't sparkle, doesn't shine, it never did. It just brings me down and disables my happiness. It has settled behind my eyes, blurring my vision of a positive future. It turns my days, hours and minutes into various shades of grey, just like itself, and denies me endlessly in this terrible high-pitched voice. If only I was braver, more honest, less indecisive. The story of my life? No, it is much worse than ever before, and I just wish I could switch it off. It's a TV that is left on, but plays nothing worth watching.
I don't underestimate the bravery that it takes to stand in this space. I thank you. That's wonderful. And now we're going to move inside a prison, and we're going to have a look at 3 very short clips from the documentary called Beautiful Sentence that was made about my work when I was writing Residence there. I've chosen 3 clips. Some of you were in a very similar room to this 3 weeks ago, so I tried to choose slightly different clips so that you're not going to see the same. And I know some of you know this film anyway, but I think it's always worth watching again and again. 3 women you're going to see, and when I was here 3 weeks ago, someone said we should give a health warning, an emotional health warning, because it's very moving seeing these women. The truth is, this is what it's like in prison. You will see women like this in any women's prison in this country. And I just want to say one thing, which, Rachel, you said that the prisons are made by men for men. This prison was made for women, and it does feel very different. So it's a private prison, and it was made specifically with women in mind. So, in my opinion, it does feel different. Nevertheless, it's a prison, and you're going to hear from 3 women. And I'm going to try and operate the technology with Erike's help. This is the scary bit of the evening for me. So you're going to see 3 women, if we can get it to work. 3 women at the back of the man.
It started off asking the questions in a poem, and it ended up as a prayer. I mean, today I just don't have, because I've only just started remembering, because it was so painful. I popped it out, and I mean, I was literally tearing my hair out in the room. I mean, when they come to fetch me through me here, I just got the duvet off and took a picture. So it's not painful to remember. This is more of a prayer than a poem, and I wrote it, literally an hour ago. Lord, only you know my heart is about to break. Only you know how much it does ache. I'm praying for flashbacks of the past. I need peace, rest in peace at the last. I feel so delicate, reverted back to a child. I will see it in my eyes as I go away. And God, this just feels like here. It doesn't feel like he's in one little bed. I hurt so much if I want to die. I don't want to live, and that's no lie. The bastards are now long dead, but they're still alive in my head. I never realised I was such a mess when I was standing in the second guess. Lord, am I really insane? Or just arrogant, immature, and vain? Lord, it's so hard to put my trust in you, to be one day, free not by you. And what I do, I work on
Just stop for a minute there, that's so beautiful.
That's what I said, with years of one, because as I say, I've been writing 2 a day, and they said, although it's so sad, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And as I say, They've now got me the point where I'm actually writing the poems instead of self-harm. Yeah. That has to be good. Of course I'd. What about the shapes that your body makes? Are they kind of, you know, the curve of your hip? What's the curve of your hip? Boobs. B-double-O-B-S. It's a photograph. Photograph. Can't tell the difference. But listen to this beautiful poem that came out there. Just listen to this beautiful poem.
Traits of a woman. Eyes made of glass, easily shattered through words, easily bloodshot through tears, makeup easily smudged through pain. Eyes can't hide fear nor pain, can't hide stress nor misery, can't hide you nor me. Eyes are identity. Thank you.
Prison phobia, a litany of fears. The fear of airports leads to the fear of customs. The fear of importation leads to the fear of deportation. The fear of contraband leads to the fear of having no substance. The fear of handcuffs leads to the fear of police, the fear of dogs, the fear of prisons. The fear of strip searches leads to the fear of being naked in front of other women. The fear of keys leads to the fear of chains. The fear of small spaces, it leads to the fear of tears, the fear of dreams, the fear of loneliness. The fear of being forgotten, it leads to the fear of time, the fear of lies. The fear of metal doors leads to the fear of dark, empty corridors. The fear of insanity leads to the fear of separation, the fear of isolation, the fear of segregation, the fear of being a statistic.
If you want to see the whole film, there's a postcard on the table over there, and it will take you to a page on the internet where you can see the whole film. But I think at this point it would be nice to have just a kind of break to, if you want to just turn to someone next to you, just see if there's any thoughts or feelings so far about anything you've heard, and then we'll move into talking about the book. But I just want to give you a bit of a space to have a quick talk, maybe just take 3 minutes or so just to check in with somebody, see if there's anything that you feel you just need to offload before we move on to the next bit. So feel free, someone you know, someone you don't, but just turn to someone and see how you're doing. So there will be time for questions in a little while, so if you've got any questions or comments, they'll be gratefully received. We're going to move on to talk about release, and so I hope you've got a sort of a backdrop for this book. And my involvement with women who self-harm, I mean, I hate saying women who self-harm because that's not a defining characteristic of the women that I've worked with. But women who self-harm, I worked on a wonderful project when I was at Bronzefield called Sharp, and I'm so excited that Georgie, who was running that project, is here tonight. And so she's going to tell us a bit about the initiative, because I think it was very exciting. And then we'll talk about how the book fitted into that. So, Georgie can.
Well, I'll give you a bit of background. When I was working at Bronzefield, I was there working as an assistant psychologist, and I'm currently a mental health nurse, so within this. But I started in 2008, myself and another colleague as an assistant psychologist, and we were brought in to run a year's programme that was aiming to try and help reduce self-harming in women's prisons in HMP Brunsfield. And I went in, having worked with ladies and girls who self-harm before, but I learned so much from my time there. We started out with just, we were going to run 2 groups with 8 women each in the groups, and they were going to last for 3 weeks. And we ran it with quite a structured programme for the first 6 months of 2-hour group therapy sessions every morning, which we would run, and we had officers working with us who would co-facilitate the group with us. And then we had all the ladies who were participating move onto a small 10-bedded unit. So we basically wanted to try and create a sort of therapeutic environment within a prison, which is not at all easy. So it changed a lot as the programme went on. To begin with, we were working by ourselves with the women. We would have our therapy sessions in the mornings, and we would just get the women to start exploring reasons for why they self-harm, if they can try alternatives to self-harm, if they're ready, if they wanted to try alternatives to self-harm. And then as time went on, we realised in the afternoons everybody was getting very bored, so I was introduced to Leah, who was working at the time, and we decided to come together in the afternoon sessions. Leah would come over and start working with the women and showing them how to use therapeutic writing. We also had a music therapist there at the time who would also come and do sessions in the afternoons, showing the women how they could work and use music therapy as a way out, or we'd try and get people over to the gym so we get structured kind of exercise going as well, just exploring any alternatives that the women felt they wanted to give a go, if they wanted to give it a go. We never expected that we would stop self-harm at all. We just wanted to create a safe environment where they could start to explore why it was they were self-harming, if there was a way that they could do something different. I was privileged to work with, I think in the total year that I was there, we had just over 60 ladies come through the programme. We had some people do it twice within quite a big framework, and some people just the once. Some people loved it, some people hated it. It was always interesting, it was always a challenge. We tried to get as many officers involved as possible as well, so that the transition of sort of leaving our little haven over in HDU and then going back into the house box wasn't too difficult. And again, sometimes that worked wonderfully and sometimes that didn't work at all. So we were there for the year. We changed our programmes completely. To begin with, our sessions were all based on cognitive behavioural therapy techniques, so just linking thoughts with behaviours and emotions and trying to work out what might be going on to give the ladies some sort of control over their urges to self-harm or need to self-harm. That changed, and we decided that we'd focus much more on the emotional side of things. And sometimes we'd do some really good work with people, and sometimes the group would just be a space to chat and moan about life in prison and what was going on. So for that year, I learned so much. In general, it was received well, I hope, and there were lots of learning points, and I hope something like that will start again in the future. But that was my role in it, and that was how I met you.
The book would never have happened if it hadn't been from that project. I started to meet women and just I just witnessed, not for every woman, but for a lot of the women, writing, just being given permission, just having somebody say, tell me what's going on for you, and then putting it on paper seemed to help. It was like Alison said in the film, I'm writing poems now instead of self-harming. You know, it's not a magical cure, but it's a way of somebody feeling valued. I often go into men's prisons with the Anne Frank Trust, and Steve's here from the Anne Frank Trust, and one of the quotes I say from Anne Frank is, paper is more patient than people. I don't think you can dispute that the women could write for the first time without someone telling them that they're rubbish, without telling them that they didn't have anything to say, that they got a chip on their shoulder. So I started to collect all this work, and then when it came to the end of the residency, I decided I wanted to make a book, and the idea was that I'd write I'd edit a book, I'd compile it. It could be a book, the way I envisaged it, it would be small enough to put under a pillow, so that if in the middle of a long, long night of being banged up, a woman could just reach for it and find something in there that spoke to her. And I've got a lot of experience, there's a lot written about the power of writing to heal emotionally. But there's a quote that I want to give which I just think is very interesting. Because we're not just talking about individual women. Women in here say, you know, when I write it hurts, afterwards it makes me feel better. Women liked listening to each other's stories. They found it helpful. It made them feel less of an aberration. It made them feel less alone. But I'm also thinking about the power of poetry to effect change in the world. And I'm just going to read this quote from a book called Poems from Guantanamo. The Detainees Speak Out, edited by Mark Forkoff. And in it, it says, "The Pentagon refuses to allow most of the detainees' poems to be made public, arguing that poetry presents a special risk to national security because of its content and format." And I don't take that lightly, actually, because it's just been interesting. The difficulty with this book is that it's a harrowing read. And what I'd say is women's lives are harrowing, some more so than others, but just by living in a world where there's misogyny, where women are disadvantaged, women end up hurting themselves. And I do want to repeat, it's the only statistic I ever say. I want to repeat what Rachel said. We've got 5% of the prison population making up 54% of incidents of self-harm. And that's not just the same woman hurting herself over and over. So I wanted to do a book. I wanted it to be readable. I wanted the words to be true to the women's words, but I wanted it to look beautiful so that it would be accessible. And I managed in 2 years to get the funding for it. I managed to raise £6,000, and I'd just like to say where the money came from, because I know some of the funders are in the room. So Swan Mountain Trust gave us money, Matrix Chambers gave us money, and Eleanor Rathbone Trust gave us money. And every time it looked like we weren't going to be able to make a beautiful book, and I went back to the funders and said, could we just have another £500? They said yes, because they believed in the work. And I came across 2 people in this room, Agnes and Imran, who are designers, they're called The Right Stuff. We met in a bed and breakfast in St Austell, and I didn't want to talk to anyone else, but I'm so pleased I spoke to you too, because they believed in the book, and they are the ones who actually translated it into the final book. They came up with the idea of the rounded corners, which I think is just wondrous. They came up with the idea of the colours for the poems. They came up with the idea of the flicker book, so if you go like that, the little butterfly flies out of the pages. Just things that would make the book accessible. And I also wanted to put writing exercises in here so women could just see how they could do their own writing. And I also wanted to put some tips in there about how you deal with emotion, because when you're writing like this, the emotions will come up, as you saw from Alison, and it's to be welcomed. I think it's a healing. I'd much rather the women got the emotions out than kept them in and found themselves hurting themselves. And I think the last thing I'll say is 80 copies have gone into every women's prison in this country, free copies. That was part of the fundraising. Because I wanted women in prison who self-harm or in danger of self-harming, I wanted them to have the book. One prison wrote back and said that the ladies didn't need it. And I was upset, but then I realised it was an open prison. And having worked recently in an open prison, I can see the conditions are different and the levels of self-harm are very low. So anyway, that prison decided not to take it. I can't pretend there aren't difficulties with the book. The book was never meant to be given to somebody and just have them left with it. That's not going to work. You know, it's a harsh book to read. And I think this is my experience that actually shows me that the book itself isn't going to do the work. When I was nearly 10, my parents went out for the evening, and as they got to the front door, my mother shoved a booklet in my hand and said, read it. So I took the booklet and she was gone. She shut the front door. And on the front cover was a little girl with a party dress, and above it said, "Now you are a young lady." You read that book. But anyway, I did what my mum told me. I sat there and I started to read it, and there were all these pictures of pink blobby things which turned out to be wounds, and drawings of massive sanitary towels, which we used to have back then. And I got more and more terrified by the minute. I sat there and read it, and I just could not believe that this was going to happen to me. So the next morning when my mum came to wake me up, she said, "Did you read it?" And I said yes, and I tried to ask her about it, but she just wouldn't talk to me about it, and it terrified me. I hope I'm over it now, but who knows? It was absolutely terrifying. And the point I want to make is it wasn't my mother's fault. My mother had to leave her mother because of the Holocaust. She never saw her mother again, so she wasn't mothered. She didn't know how to do that piece. It wasn't her fault. And how I translate that into prison work is that this book is never going to work. If somebody's going to be locked up from 7 at night till 7 in the morning, which is what's happening, if you just gave them a book, it's not it. It needs to be done within relationship. I've seen some amazing prison officers in my time going into prisons where they really understand about the need to hold a woman, maybe not physically, but emotionally, be able to hold that space. But if a prison officer can't use this book, it's not the fault of the prison officer. I mean, why should they know how to use it? But it's not the fault of the book. And so I think the challenge ahead is going to be how to be able to have the book used to help change a culture in women's prisons. The book itself is not going to do it. So you can tell I'm in the middle of this process, how to actually get it used rather than kept in a cupboard, because it's too risky, it's too dangerous. The women want to talk, but we have to find ways of making it possible. So now we come to, for me, a very moving part, which is where we get to hear some of the poems in here, and some of them will be read by the women who wrote them. And at the end, if you decide you want a copy, we can't sell it because it's in this space, but you can give a donation, and all proceeds are going to the organisation Women in Prison. So that's my bit of hard sell. And if there aren't enough copies there, then you can always get it online. So having said that, I'd like to welcome up the first person to read a poem. And Katie, are you going to explain, or do you want me to explain how I used your poem?
Oh, right, it's that one now.
It's that one.
Oh, right.
Do you want me to explain how I used it? So I met Katie, not in prison, but she showed me this poem she'd written to women who self-harm. And I took this poem into the SHARP programme and said, this poem has been written to women who self-harm. What would your response be? So Katie is now going to read the poem that she wrote, and Bella is going to read the reply by Amanda. And Amanda is no longer with us, and so it's especially powerful to start the reading with Amanda's words.
This is called The Scars on Your Arms, and I wrote it when I was in a therapeutic community for mental health boards. And I wrote it about a boyfriend who carved his arms up and would never speak of it. The scars on your arms. The scars on your arms show me where you've been, some of the pain you must have seen. They are a proof of mind over matter, scalpel sharp, when many would have cried, the rage inside made you carve your personal barcode on your body as a permanent reminder of a marked outsider. Your skin twisted, looking like raked earth, becoming hillocks of wounded, gaping flesh between the silver crescent slivers, some exposed and some so wide. I want to ask, why were they not stitched, but lay bare to congeal until it was too late for them to heal? You forbid me
from asking too many questions. You feel ashamed, and I am blamed for picking at old scabs. Your arms look like a relief map that orientates me and shows the depth of pain you must have known. Cut to the quick, raw, sometimes even to the bone. They reveal some of your history, your very private grief that remains a personal mystery.
And they are ending up in jail. And that's just coming up, bubbling up to the surface. So you're absolutely on the money, and if you can just get the whole thing pulled together, like Farah's trying to do, if you can put it all together, work in a holistic way with these people, women, children, you can find a solution.
Well, and something for you guys to research if you want to is Bessel van der Kolk, who's widely considered the world expert on PTSD, put together a diagnosis that they're trying very hard to get included in the new DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual. It's coming out 2013 called Developmental Trauma Disorder, that addresses that children who are raised in a traumatic environment have permanent brain and body changes, and that these things really do need to be addressed at the level of just physicality. So yes, thank you for that.
Thank you very much. The last question from young lady in second hand.
It was just a quick comment really, more of a suggestion, and it was based on what you'd already said about the criteria for meeting, or being able to engage with the programme. I guess it's just compare that, the low-level offences, the insurance issues, which I know are big because I've managed housing hostels for people in conflict with the law before. I know that's an issue in terms of high-level sexual offences, arson, etc. But considering the dynamic and unique approach and the investment you want to give, surely those types of